So this is Dr. Carl Berg. We're really, truly fortunate to have him here today. He stopped in on his way from Kauai and out to California, so took advantage of that. And just some history is his PhD is in zoology, actually, in, like we always say here now, in the Pleistocene, so it's in the 1970s. And building up there, which he's pointed out to me, is falling down this part at this point. Carl's been, so after he did his PhD, he went back east and he did some work with Hui, Woods Hole, and at New York University as a professor, and did work down in Florida with the technical institute there. Around 1990, he moved back to Hawaii and started this kind of maverick career, I would say almost. That he started his Hawaii Wildlife Tours. Is that still operating? It's not, is it? Or is it still
I'm not doing tours, but I still use it as a mechanism to get grants.
Yeah, so he's
own private company.
He started this private corporation for this ecosystem tour, and ever since has been intimately steeped in everything related to environmental activism and looking at the environment and pollution from watersheds into rivers, into the ocean, through groundwater. He's had many funding sources. I don't know if you rattle them all off, but NOAA and EPA, et cetera. And he's received awards from the governor. He's outstanding volunteer. National Resource Defense Council named him the National Beach Hero. I think that's pretty cool. He got the Sierra Club Award for the Environmentalist of the Year. So, like I said, we're lucky to have him. He's a great guy. I think you'll enjoy today's lecture. So, Carl.
There's my title. He made me give it a title. Thank you for the introduction. Maverick. How about journeyman scientist? Something
Yeah.
In 1990, I had a classic midlife crisis and said, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Why am I stuck in the Florida Keys? There must be more to life than being a scientist. And that's when I decided to move back to move and traveled all around to the islands that I had worked on and decided that Kauai was the best spot. And it was a career shift. I suddenly just said, my career as a scientist is not the most important thing in life. How I'm living and my relationships are more important. And once I get there, I'll figure out how to support myself. And after I built a house and my daughter went off to college and gave me this huge college bill, I said, oh, I better go back to work right away. And I took a job with the Department of Health, Clean Water Branch on Kauai, monitoring water quality. And they said, okay, here's what we do. Every week we go out and we sample water from all these beaches. So why do we sample there? Well, because that's where people go swimming. And are they polluted? No, they're not polluted. Well, why don't we sample the rivers and things? Well, we don't because we know they're polluted. Wait, so if you know you're polluted, why shouldn't we be sampled? No, because if we broadcast that we know they're polluted, we'll have to do something about it. And I said, well, this is stupid, And so, being way over on Kauai and the headquarters over here, I got to do whatever I wanted. And was also brought in to West Maui to look at the injection well problem there 30 years ago and other things. And I did that for 3 years. My salary was dependent upon how much tuition Smith College charged. And on the last payment off of the tuition, I quit and said that's it. And I refused to take down warning polluted signs, stuff like that. But I had learned enough about that to be concerned about water quality throughout the state of Hawaii, and realized that it wasn't just what was coming down the rivers and streams, but also groundwater, which the Department of Health refused to recognize that there was such a problem. Pollution was point source. You had a pipe, and that was it. There is nothing else. And about that time, in Hanalei, we received national recognition as a heritage river, and we set up a nonprofit. And one of the first things I wanted to do was to look at the water pollution in Hanalei Bay, and which I had already documented. And so we start out, and I got a targeted watershed initiative grant from EPA, first one that they had issued, to look at the entire watershed. What were the pollution loads, and how did it affect the coral reefs out there? So with Malcolm Mackay, and this is all stuff you hear all the time now, but this was 15 years ago, and we sort of invented the words. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. The references I gave you were, two of them were the projects I was involved with, and the other one was something more recent to just give an idea of a watershed approach to pollution problems. Let's see if this works. Right, left. There we go. Okay, so.
Top one is a pointer.
Yep. So in looking at water quality studies or pollution studies, we have two definite breaks here. The first thing is whether something is a public health risk. And in most cases, the pollution levels are so small, whether you're looking at any kind of chemicals, that's not the problem. It's the pathogens, and that's the viruses and bacteria that are and prions also, that are going to affect you and make you sick. And so I break this down into public health risk kind of studies, and then also environmental health studies. So our Department of Health breaks it off into Department of Health and then public health, environmental health, and then under environmental health they have bacterial studies, but they totally ignore all of these other things. And these are just general classes of pollutants that we are finding in our environment. Now I have no idea what the other speakers in this series have talked to you about or covered, and I'm not going to try to talk down to you at all. What I find is that most people, they know what nutrients and sediment and pesticides are, especially on the other islands where we have a lot of GMO crops and which are being grown to be resistant to pesticides, so heavy pesticide use. Detergents are a man-made item that is used for washing your clothes or your dishwashing detergents. They're not a natural thing. Personal care products are things like insecticide, DEET, or triclosan, antibacterial soaps, are all sorts of estrogenic compounds, are aspirin, acetaminophen, that we can pick up. Also THC, cocaine, heroin, ice, all of those things are pollutants that you can find in the environment. Ocean acidification, temperature rise, and radiation. And radiation, I added that on because of the great nuclear disaster in Fukushima and the fact that that wave of radiation is moving across the ocean, and a lot of this work I've been doing in conjunction with Dr. Delovia, who will be here shortly, I hope, and can correct me on anything I say. We're looking at three areas: beaches, surf breaks, and estuaries. So I'm not doing open ocean stuff because I did that, I don't want to do that anymore. And so I'm looking more what's affecting the coral reefs and affecting the people in the waters. So it's those areas that my research has been studying. And so the big thing is, how do land-based pollutions get into the ocean? Most of you don't think of or consider aerosols. And that's, of course, all the CO2 type stuff. It's all the dust coming from Africa with the iron that causes great phytoplankton blooms. You may know about that. I was really blown away. I was hiking up across the island of Kauai. They had built a road way back, power lines and everything, and I'm walking back there. I don't even remember what that study was about. And suddenly the ground was white. And, so I got geologists and USGS involved, and there was this 5-foot layer of white all the rest of our island is dirt red, right? Everything on Hawaii is dirt red. This is white. Come to find out, I don't know the right date, 1,000,000 years ago, all this dust came from China. And there was a big marsh up there, and it just filled it all in. And it blew all the way from China. Most of you know about mercury poisoning, and we can't eat the tuna because of mercury stuff. Where's it coming from? It's an aerosol. I use the term aerosol. It's coming out of the smokestacks of all the different electric generation, coal generating. That's the kind of aerosols we're talking about. And in the case of Kauai, the pesticides are being sprayed carefully, but all over the place. That could be blown into the ditches and streams, and it could be blown into the ocean. Surface water runoff, as we have a lot of rain on Kauai, or we used to. We're in a drought. Climate change is really going to screw us here. But we have surface water runoff, and then we have what this is all about, groundwater discharge. Henrietta put this together for me for a previous presentation. Just the idea in general, since most people don't know at all, the size or magnitude of the groundwater discharge that's coming into the ocean here. In this case, you can see okay. What I'm looking at is Hanalei Bay on the North Shore of Kauai. And Enterococcus is a kind of bacteria which is an indicator of fecal contamination from warm-blooded animals. So that's humans, but it's also pigs and horses and cows and birds. But this is what pretty much the international standard is for testing recreational waters. Not drinking water or sewage water, but recreational water. Is this polluted with sewage? You test for Enterococcus. And there's a simple test that we can do. So Surfrider is going out and testing all of this. And what we found was that, in fact, the streams are heavily polluted. So the count should be no more ever than 130, excuse me now. But the average should be no more than 35. So this average at 395 is 10 times the allowable limit. It's polluted. This one, 351, this is 631. The ocean is nice and clean here. The beaches, nice and clean. This is the Hanalei River, and another little stream coming out here. So in looking at this study, way back in 2003, 2004, the beaches here were polluted. The stream had a count of about 250 or more, and that's why we had the Targeted Watershed Initiative grant to clean it up. And what we did was to remove the cesspools along the Hanalei River. And that was effective in bringing it down to about 108. So if you look at here, what you can say is that we don't have a large bacterial problem, and the bacteria is an indicator of sewage, so therefore we're not getting sewage, even though all these homes, all of here, just have a hole in the ground, and all the shit just goes into the hole in the ground, and it's sand, and it just percolates out. We don't seem nowadays to have much of a problem with the bacteria concentrations. The Department of Health goes out every week and samples all over the place, and the places that are listed in red are the places that have a high bacteria count. The geomean, again, should be 35, that these are a little bit high, and this has changed. It's now, it should be less than 130. Back when I did this graph, it was 104, but only a few percentage of the time. So in this case, both of these are where rivers and streams come in. But if you look at this, hey, the waters around Kauai are nice and clean because they don't have any bacteria counts. The waters around Kauai are nice and clean because the Department of Health samples only where the water is nice and clean. It's a self-serving. One of the cases, I'm not sure it's up here, Hanamaulu Beach, here, that's not too bad, but in 2013 it made the NRDC, National Resource Defense Council. It was tied for 10th most commonly or frequently polluted beach in the nation, right? And it had been for like 2 years. So what did the Department of Health do? stopped sampling. It never got on that list again. I should add, if you have any, this is obviously going to be an informal presentation, so as questions come up as I run through all this stuff, interrupt if we'll cover them right away, okay? Versus waiting till the end and you don't remember what I was talking about.
A question then?
Yeah.
Do they not, Department of Health don't have like a legal document stating they have to sample certain locations, frequencies, based
No.
on, so they do whatever they.
Code of ethics, maybe.
Pardon me?
Code of ethics, maybe.
What's that?
Carl,
Well, I have a real problem with this, and in fact, tomorrow I'm going to EPA headquarters to discuss with them the problem I'm having with the Department of Health, because, segue into the next slide, this is where Surfrider samples. Surfrider is a nonprofit volunteer organization who's is trying to protect the environment for ocean, beaches, and waves for all users. And so we have what is called Blue Water Task Force, and on Kauai, one Saturday a month, second Saturday of every month, I have about 18 volunteers go out and get water samples, and in my kitchen, I turn it into a lab, and we do all the bacterial analysis and come up with these numbers. And just looking at the red, you can see there's a remarkable difference here. That some of our places here, 100% of the time, they're polluted. These places are not on the Department of Health list. Here, if you look at these, the geometric mean, they're not too bad. But where I'm concerned, and this is why I want to talk to the Department of Health, is that we have some here that are averaging at about 10,000 or 1,000. It's supposed to be 35. This is just astronomically off the charts. What don't you know about being polluted? But they're not doing anything about it. And I think, to get back to your comment, I think it's unethical. That's the proper term. And it's unethical that they're not posting even warning signs on these places. Why would you not want to post a warning sign on a beach in Hawaii?
Tourism.
You know there was a big sewage, I don't know. Did you know there was a big sewage spill in Waikiki, Moana, what, a month ago?
Kailua too.
Yeah, in Kailua too, and Kauai too, but all the same rainstorms. But the big one here, and they did not sample at Waikiki Beach. It came out Alamoa. They did not sample because it's 4 o'clock, we gotta go home. And they didn't even sample it, and they didn't put signs up. So I don't know.
Well, you know, in their defense, I think they are extremely understaffed. You know, I don't, so you may have 18.
Okay, that's it, okay, right. The unfortunate thing is that I've been working with them for 20-something years, and it's in our state constitution and each island county constitution that you will protect public health. And so they are not meeting the mandate of the state constitution. And why not? Because the Department of Health does not feel it's important enough to allocate the resources for it. Right? They could have, over 20 years, they could have do this. When we had the big recession and they cut the Department of Health monitoring staff in half or something like that. So what did they do? They hired me, cheap, because I didn't, I'm not getting any retirement or benefits. They gave me a grant to go out and help do the water sampling for them. And we compromised on where I would sample or not sample. So some of those places are in here. The big point is that there are a lot of places that have really high bacteria counts, and I'm going to revisit these later on because bacteria is just one indication of pollution, sewage pollution coming in. We're going to look at see phosphorus, we're going to see bacteroidales and other things later.
I want to ask you about enterococci. Is that really the best indicator for fecal material? I mean, what about Clostridium? I mean, is it ubiquitous in the environment without fecal contamination?
Okay, so there's been a number of studies done, which the Department of Health totally ignores, and the one came out recently about a big study in Brazil, in Rio, and they did a huge public health study, and they found that Enterococcus was the best indicator. But in 2011, there was a wonderful study done here on Oahu, where they went and they actually looked at the staph, the strep, they looked at the pathogens, the really dangerous ones you don't want to handle. And what they went to a number of streams here, and what they found was that the best correlation was with Enterococcus. Second, it was with Clostridium. But there's something even better, which is Bacteroides or Bacterodales. That name sound familiar? That was the paper I made you read. Right. Whose name, the first author's name is this long, Vertowach. I can't pronounce it. That paper, in that paper, the reason I chose that one is that it's using this new technique and it's working out of watershed basin analysis, and it's using a new statistical technique. So the answer is the Department of Health has been saying they don't have to do it because those techniques, Enterococcus, is no good. The rest of the world is saying, yeah, that's true, but it's the best we got. And in the case of this one, the Waiopili stream at Mahalalaku, the average is now up to 10,000. When we brought this to the notice of the Department of Health, they went out and did the Clostridium, and the Clostridium tests were way high, indicating fecal. And then they went and did the Bacteroides tests, and the test said it was human, and we still don't have signposting. Okay. So you can do RNA testing on Bacterodales or Bacteroides, which is what that paper is about, and you can figure out, looking at the RNA or DNA, whether this bacterium is coming from a human source or a ungulate source or a bird source. You can do all sorts of things. And you're going to have to memorize this because I'm going to refer to it later. Okay, if we look at the Hanalei Pavilion at the beach, we got bacteria, human bacteria here. Koloa Landing, human bacteria here. Waimea Landing, here we got a number of these places. In Koloa Landing, one of them, we do have human factor in there. So if you have high Enterococcus that comes from anything, if you have Bacterodales that only comes from human or pig, you can figure it out. Then a pretty good indication that you're having sewage contamination of the water. And if you have sewage with bacteria, what else do you got? That's what we'll talk about maybe next. What else do you have? Is you're having all sorts of bacteria, nitrate phosphates, ammonia, and all of the red exceed the, hello. All of the red numbers exceed the state standards for water pollution. And so the question here, we already know that from the slide of Hanalei Bay, that these estuaries have super high bacteria counts. Well, now we can also say, oh, look at this, they have nitrate, they have ammonia, and they have total phosphorus also. So they're polluted for bacteria and all of these nutrients. The question is, where is this coming from and what can we do about it? And so this is where I had this question, and the question came up, is this coming all down the streams? That's where I just showed it was from the estuary, or is it coming from groundwater discharge? And in this case, this is the other paper that you were supposed to have read. I made contact with somebody, Ali Bain from Hawaii back then, who was looking at bacteria concentrations, and I got a number of the students, graduate students, to start working on this problem at these different places. So here is Hanalei Bay, here, this is up at Princeville, and then Hyanna, I'm going to talk about Hyanna, is way out here at the end, very, very separate. But, and I have to thank Henrietta for making up all these slides for the talk that she didn't show up at and made me do instead. This is from Nee's paper. It showed that there are, in those areas, that there are some of them are sewer, but a lot of the places have septic systems. That fresh water can, actually I went and looked at the data, I found some as much as 15% of the nearshore water is fresh water coming in, and that the radium coastline indicates groundwater discharge, and that we have a lot of nutrients coming in from that. So we have nutrients pouring in to the bay, both from groundwater and surface water. Here she actually went and looked at the fluxes. If you look at the nitrates, phosphates, yeah, we're getting there. But the one that here, there's no significant difference on the bottom between the surface and groundwater for E. coli and Enterococcus. But there were more in the rivers than in the groundwater. So why would that be? Well, the sand and the mud serves as a filter because bacteria have a mass, they have a size, or 1 micron or more. Viruses are 1/10 that size. So those things do get filtered by the ground, whereas the nutrients don't, as particles, don't get filtered, but there may be ionic exchange such that they get sucked up and bound to that. But there is definitely, coming in here, groundwater discharge into our bay, and because of that, we have to consider looking at all the sources of pollution, how we're going to clean this up. Looking at here, oh, that was the other important thing, is that looking at the bacteroidales, that the groundwater did have the human factor in it. So this really suggests that all of those septic systems, mainly cesspools, I'll talk to you in a minute about the difference, but all the sewage coming out of those houses is not going to a sewage treatment plant, it's just going into the ground, the sandy ground in Honolulu and other areas, and it's finding its way into the bay. And if it's the bacteria, if they're still alive, they can infect the corals, and the mucus on the corals is a good substrate for them. And then you have all the chemicals that are coming out of those septic systems and cesspools that can affect all the corals also. There's been a lot of press recently about global climate change and coral bleaching. Have you all said all of it? In Hawaii, our corals are all bleaching, and they're saying, oh, we got to do this. We have to cut back on pollution. We have to cut back on overfishing. Well, their effect is nothing compared to ocean acidification and temperature rise. And here we can find this stuff, but it's a magnitude difference. So the question we still had, and I'm asking the graduate students, Karen D, is okay, what other tracer can we use to look at the groundwater contamination and say, yes, it really is coming from those cesspools and everything. And she came up to do a study on caffeine. It is nasty on corals. She sampled out in Hyanna, Farway, Honolulu, and over at Princeville. Seasonal inputs, it's in all the groundwater and surface water samples suggesting human, and more in summer. Any idea why we would have more caffeine in summer? What does it mean?
There's more tourists in the summer.
Not as it's more concentrated, less rain.
Yeah, you have less runoff.
You're both right.
Yeah, you
Right.
sweat. So
Why are there more tourists? Because there's less rain in the summer. So you get more tourists and you have less rainfall, and so the concentration in the groundwater is probably higher. Maybe. Unfortunately, we haven't done a study. I mean, this is something you could do very easily. Just take samples every month, every week, and just look at how many tourists are on board. You can get that. You all sign those cards when you fly in. We could. I don't know. Yeah, I'll show you later. You want to know how many tourists are in Honolulu or at Hyanna? Any idea how to, and their impact on the environment? Any idea how to figure that out?
Hotel counts. The D-bed has all that information.
Yeah,
They're required to report their
No, what you do
percentage of
is you
rooms.
ask your water department how much did each hotel each house use in water? Because the biggest use of water is toilet flushes. But even if it's not toilet flushes, if you take a shower, you're washing all the bacteria and soaps and everything off your body there. So, whether it's Hyena State Park or Honolulu, when I went to the County of Kauai Water Department and said, hey, I want to know how much water is going there, the guy came up to us. I said, hi, my name is Dr. Berg. I'm working with Surfrider. I need to know how much water is going into Honolulu Bay. Can you tell me? There's one water tank, just one water tank up above Honolulu. All the water comes out of one pipe, and there's a valve, and they measure it because they have to add chlorine, right? And through the grapevine, I heard that the valve wasn't working, but that's okay. So how do they just that much? And it goes down into town. And so I go and ask, and he said, I'll have to ask my supervisor. And he comes back and he said, no, I can't tell you that information. Why can't you tell me that information? My boss just said, I can't tell you that information. I said, okay, would you please ask your boss why? And he came back and he said, well, you could be a terrorist and you would know now how much poison to put in the water tank to poison all the things if you knew how much water came out. Right? This was 2014 maybe? No, after 9/11. And I said, that is stupid. I know, Greg. Come on. So I said, go back, talk to him again. And he came back and he said, well, we cannot tell you how much water is coming out of the tank. He said, but what I'll do is I'll tell you how much each and every house in Honolulu uses, and you just add them up. Cool. And what we found out, which was interesting, I don't want to go back, but there was one place in Honolulu Bay that the lifeguards called sewers. There's one spot there called sewers. Why do you call it sewers? It smells. Well, when we got the water bill from all the houses on Honolulu Bay, they all were 300 gallons a day, something like that, except this one that was 1,000 gallons a day. What's going on? Well, they had leaky toilets, and they were just running. It was a vacation rental, and the water was just running into the cesspool there, flushing all of the shit out into the ocean, right out there. It was coming as groundwater and coming up at about 10 foot deep, about 100 feet offshore, and there's beautiful green algae growing and everything right there. So I happened to know the owner of the house and said, hey, Carol, you got to do something about this. God, she's an ardent environmentalist. Why me? Why you? So she fixed it immediately, and the water bill went down. So we were able to pick that. But on a broader scale, we suddenly knew how much groundwater discharge was coming from all these homes and going into the cesspool, which was going out into the bay. And there's a positive correlation between the indicator bacteria and the caffeine levels.
Question about caffeine, going back a little bit, but do you have a sense about how much caffeine may be coming from plant sources? The paper said there were 14 plants, and we don't really know.
Did you read the paper?
I did, and they kind of brushed it off.
I don't remember which one of these papers that you read.
So they kind of brushed that, that input off and said, we don't know how to quantify that. But I'm just wondering if you, outside of black and white ink, have an idea about. No,
there's very, very little because there's very, very few plants that have the caffeine in it. Now, but Honolulu, I don't know what, 120 years ago, it was a coffee plantation. It was a citrus plantation before it went into sugar and everything like that. And there are old coffee things, and a lot of people are growing coffee now and chocolate, right? You want to become self-sufficient or sustainable. What's more necessary than chocolate and coffee? Right? An island somewhere. So I think it's very, very little. But the other thing you can do is, which you didn't do, is you simply take your water samples up above the population and down below.
Yeah, there weren't too many background samples.
Right.
In that.
She took like
Study.
one upstream Honolulu, and that's it. Like our one sample above human impact, and it was like, well,
since all of our population in Honolulu is right on the beach, right, and all the water flows down that way, you could go back up. one of the highest samples she got was by the taro fields. And there was nobody within, I don't know, quarter mile or something like that on all the homes. And so we were wondering if there was a natural source in there, and we couldn't see any. And it can't be the ducks. Bacteria can be ducks and birds and stuff, but caffeine only comes from plants, right? And Coca-Cola and all soft drinks and tea and things. And the only thing we could figure was the Haraguchi family that had 4 generations were just upstream, and that must be their input. But I wouldn't dare tell them that, because I already told them that most of the nitrogen that was killing off the reefs was coming from the fertilizer they gave me and that in their taro fields. So that I was no longer a friend to go tell them they better stop drinking tea. But it was a real concern. And the time sequence is different here. But what we did, we went to the Haraguchis and we got rid of all their cesspools. And we made septic systems. And the bacteria counts plummeted. And the human indicators disappeared. But we didn't go back and check to see whether there was still the input of the caffeine or any of the other things. Fun study. She also looked at the different pesticides here, and only found the one, and the metribuzin was found in May, but not in August. What is the planting season here? And they would be using these pesticides for pre-emergence and early emergence. They'd be using it in the springtime. They wouldn't be using it in August. And so anything that was applied would have gone surface runoff or the groundwater discharge in that period. But this is only two samples here. And I'll talk more about our pesticide studies, but we didn't test for any of these here. We didn't think they were the most commonly used. So I just referred to this, that there was a lot of nitrogen coming in the groundwater and also from the stream. And we had all this algae growing out there. And so this was done, the paper was published in 2007. We did this about 2003, did this study. And I think it was 2002 that Ivan Valiella and the guys out in Woods Hole were doing their big marsh studies and looking at the nitrogen isotopes. So back then, this was a brand new, neat technique that was just being investigated. And the thing worked out really well. And so if you look, and I'm going to talk to you about Anna later. She didn't test out there. But if you look at the nitrogen isotope ratios here, what you find is that sewage is up in here, 10 on up. For the West Maui injection wells, they were finding values 30 to 50 in the nitrogen levels right where the seeps were. And then the fertilizer here, this fertilizer, I literally went up to Rodney and said, hey, what fertilizer you put on your taro fields? Can you give me some? And he said, yeah, get a jar. I think I gave him my coffee cup. He filled it up with fertilizer. I gave that to Karen and said, here, analyze this. This is what they use. And so that's here. Whoa, wrong button. That's what we're using here for the fertilizer thing. And so what we're finding is that, in fact, the fertilizer and the soil that's washing down there are what the major cause of the algal growth in the bay. So this then led to something I'll talk about later. Well, how do we cut back on the amount of nitrogen coming from the taro fields in Hanalei? And we have to do it both on the runoff, but this is all about groundwater discharge. We have to deal with groundwater discharge too. So this is another estimate of what we're getting, and in this case, we're not getting sewage. We had thought we would get a lot of sewage. You know, I just told you about all the bacteria going into the bay from the thing. We thought we'd get a lot of sewage nitrogen. We're not. We're getting the fertilizer nitrogen as the major source. This is a paper done in England, and the reason I pulled this out was, I'm not sure that all of you know what a septic system is. And in this case, usually I do graph. You have a house, you have a toilet, you flush the toilet, it goes down, it comes into a tank, the big pieces settle out, the fluid comes out, it's distributed by a box into shallow pipes, and then it percolates down into the ground, and that's all well and good, and as far as Department of Health goes, it disappears. But what happens is that this is groundwater discharge. This is a neat graphic, you know? That's what I call it. And in some cases, if you have a broken pipe or thing, you get a direct discharge like that. And this is exactly what's happening in Honolulu. And we did this big effort to get rid of the cesspools and put in all these high efficiency septic systems. And the septic systems are designed to keep pieces out of the water and also to kill off all the bacteria and viruses. They're not designed to get rid of any of the chemicals. Now they have some that are working at better means in putting membranes in there to try to get rid of the nitrogen aspect of it. But this study, which came out of Frontiers in Ecology, this study had this neat graph here, which shows on the left, this is the amount of phosphate in the streams. That was from the previous, all those stream things. Look at all the phosphate going in there over the years, and then they got rid of all of the septic systems and put it all into a sewage treatment plant, and you got this. And why do you have these is because they had super big floods. So what happens when all your land is under a foot of water or 2 foot of water, like Charleston, South Carolina, last week, or what, the LOI a month ago? What happens, right? Is that all of the stuff that's in those old leach fields gets washed out. Now, so in this case, it's all land-based. In Honolulu, you have all those septic systems, or cesspools, or septic systems, and they're in the sand in back of the town. And so when it rains and floods, as it used to quite often in Honolulu, you'd have a foot of water, the whole town would be under a foot of water. All of that stuff settles down and moves out. But the other thing that is that with climate change and sea level rise, the water level is getting higher, and it's going back into land, into those septic systems. Those septic systems are, by law, 3 feet under the surface of the ground, and by law, they're supposed to be 3 feet above the groundwater. In Honolulu, you can't do that. They're not 6 feet there. And so what they do is they build them up on top of the land, and we pointed out to the county that their septic system for their beach park was insufficient because, one, it was broken, so it was leaking directly. 2, it was not above the high water mark. It was only like a foot above the high water mark. And so they laid it on top of the land and then put sand on top of it and then planted plants on top of that. But the very ingenious house of vacation rental nearby, they put it in, and the groundwater was basically 1 foot underneath that. And so what they did is they put that septic tank and the septic system on top of the land. They built a concrete block wall all the way around it and filled it up on top. And that was really cool until people used it, and then all the fluids oozed out. So they dug it out, lined it, coated it with impervious substances, filled it back in, made it nice and grassy on the top, and put the lawn chairs and the beach umbrellas on top, and a wooden walkway from the house up on stilts, because the water comes in all the time, stilts out to their patio, which is the septic system out there, which is all really nice, except it's all just going right into the ground. They haven't done it. So phosphorus, okay, this is important. An important point to remember as we get to the next slide is that this phosphorus is a real good indicator of sewage pollution and has major effects upon the environment.
And this is specifically in rivers, right?
Now,
Phosphorus specifically in rivers, not in groundwater necessarily, or just groundwater?
that was in the streams. Now this is the other paper, which I really liked, because it was more recent and it had different techniques in it, including this mapping. Right now I'm trying to map out Kauai land use and looking at different ways of doing that. But in this case, this is Michigan. Okay, this is from that other paper that you were to read. And here are the different sampling sites all along there. And what they did is to go in and look at the E. coli, which is another bacteria that is normally used for measuring water quality, fresh water, and the Bacteroides, B theta, and looked at the different concentrations of the two. And what I found fascinating was just how huge concentrations they have in here. So this is a new technique, and the idea we were talking before that Enterococcus may not be very good, E. coli may not be good, Clostridium not. Well, the Bacteroides is they're looking at the DNA or the RNA, one branch of the RNA of that bacteria, and that one is specifically found in human guts versus cow guts or anybody else's guts. And they could do a quantitative estimate of that. And so here they're looking at all of that and finding their differential concentrations of it in this rivers at base flow, and that's important at base flow. Okay. So what was important here is that they were able to find through their CART analysis, which Peter has to explain that to me, mathematician. The CART analysis basically sorted it out and said that once you have more than 1,680 septic systems in your area, that you're going to get these high concentrations of Bacteroides, meaning that you're overloading the whole system such that you're getting contamination of all those waters. Interesting thing I saw recently for Michigan, that all of their ponds, all of their little ponds and lakes, all of them are polluted. That in that area of that state, they have too many houses, too many cows, too much, and there is no longer unpolluted water. And the only thing that's really saving Hawaii is that we have an ocean that flushes them away. If we were land-based, it would be the same problem with all those septics. So this is a more modern technique, and that's the main reason I brought that in. So if you are going to look at watershed analysis, and I don't know, but this part of Michigan here is probably the same as the state of Hawaii, definitely bigger than Kauai. And Kauai has 69 Apua watersheds on it, pretty much the same. But this could easily be done for any area in the Hawaiian Islands, the same sort of analysis. So this is K.A. Lagoon. Remember on that map with Nearshore, Kauai, far on the left was Ha'ana Beach Park and K.A. Lagoon. And back then we looked at the groundwater discharge, and we were concerned that there really was some groundwater discharge out there. This area is extremely important culturally. There's beautiful heiau that have been in continuous use for 1,000 years. There's homes further to the right in that, but we have thousands of tourists coming there every day because you have this beautiful beach area, lagoon, and then this is the start of the Nepali Trail, and we have 1,000 people or so a day are hiking the Nepali Trail. And in this whole area, there's only one restroom facility, which is right there, and that's a new one. And what happened was that, I don't know when, probably around 2005 or so, the hiking trail got into Lonely Planet and everything, and we have a new generation of people who love to hike and outdoors stuff. So we started getting more and more and more tourists, and this area got totally overused, and the county, or actually it's a state park, the state park restroom facility here was overburdened. It was leaking, it was overflowing with, yeah. And so they decided that they were going to go in and they were going to put a great brand new restroom facility. However, there's one problem, there's lots of problems, but one problem is that this is all sand area here, and it is a major burial ground for the Hawaiian people. That's all sacred. And when the people say, I'm not sure if you know the Iwi Kupuna, the bones of my ancestors are buried there. And so those words have a really high sacred meaning to the Hawaiian people. But in the case of Lea Salson, who was a student at KCC, who